His answer fell like a rock into still water. He seemed smaller, younger now, like he was still 19.
Truthfully.
As soon as it comes to you, it appears my reason goes out the window, as long with much of my dignity. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. My name is Death by Pony and today we're hopping right back in to our life. So without further ado, let's go. You didn't miss the mark of sarcasm that snuck into his words despite his best efforts. We can prepare the colors. Perusing the counter for what remained of the supplies, picked up the box of food coloring. It's seen use before, judging by the inky smears left on Baxter's fingertips as he gathered the few bottles he needed, every color except for yellow. As he worked through them, you pried open the little tubs of frosting.
All right.
Nearly all of that will be red. Let's save some of the white, off-white, I suppose. Cream cheese can only look so pale, and a little extra for the black parts. I do believe mixing blue and green and red will produce black. After closing the text of the photos, he searched online for how to bake black frosting. Yes, it appears to be the way. According to adding cocoa powder will make an even richer black. Oh, clever. I don't have any. He shot a glance in your direction, lip pressed into a thin smile. As a wise man once said, of course you don't have baking supplies. 2 little bowls were filled with several messy spoonfuls of frosting. The rest was plopped into a large salad bowl, which Baxter couldn't help not noticing as ironic. Dye was added drop by drop, building up the shades as he went. Red bottle was squeezed, nearly empty, to reach a true red that matched the controller. Your white frosting was the only one that remained unblemished. What precious little red remained was reserved for the black, which ended up a dismal gray. A harsh thing to think about, a color that was, well, somewhat somber by nature. Still, Baxter didn't want to push the dye any further at risk of ruining its taste or consistency. Few people are likely to notice that the black is more of a... His words strayed into nothing, eyes half-lidded as he stared at the frosting with newfound recognition. Baxter? Huh? His face turned to you with a taut expression of unspoken emotion. Baxter unthinkingly reached out to wipe a bit of leftover frosting stuck to your fingers, stopping himself before he did. All right, nothing. This will work fine for our purpose. He went to withdraw saran wrap from one of the kitchen drawers, proceeded to hastily wrap up the 3 bowls before finally putting them away in his fridge. With the frosting and the stencil taken care of, the 2 of you busied yourselves cleaning the counters and tossing the refuse. Pieces of cardboard, a hollow-out tub of frosting tub, and failed controller outlines. Baxter even got a chance to properly hang his jacket. The timer rang out as you continued with minor chores. You moved on to cutting out the stencil using the same scissors Baxter set aside from his adventures in opening the cake mix box. Baxter handled the cake. Toothpick test was done and came out clean. It was time for your treat to chill inside the freezer until it was set enough to be decorated. Outside of that, everything that needed to be done had more or less been done. It was odd how familiar the empty space between the finished cake and the almost finished one felt. Then again, this had all happened before, hadn't it? You weren't left lingering in that quiet thought for long. Baxter had a plan what to do next. Of sorts. It amounted to pressing against the fridge with his body, almost perfectly parallel to it, and staying that way. Before you could ask, he sighed deeply as if the air had stored in his body was being sucked out of him by the devious appliance he'd become attached to. I can't believe I'm doing this again. You and me both. I can. Why wouldn't we, right? Gonna get another irresponsible drink, you asked jokingly. What are you implying? You're not thrilled about this development? You teased. You sighed alongside, not literally. There was enough space by the fridge for that. You shook your head in surprise. I can, why wouldn't we? Or make a joke. Or tease. Oh, apparently we're going with a joke. I wish I had a drink, but as you say, that'd be unprofessional. Baxter's eyes closed as he languished there in relative silence. The veneer of him being put together wedding planner had been shipped since before you walked through his front door. It was the entire absence then who he actually had been left exposed. You wanted to talk to him, the Baxter before you. I was meaning to ask, but what made you volunteer to do this? Why did you mention the groom's cake in the first place? It's not healthy to push yourself this much. No one would have thought anything of it if you hadn't brought it up. Is it because you know the couple personally? Doing things last minute was terrible planning, I have to say. You're pretty funny, you know. You waited patiently. Pretty funny. You always get caught putting out fires for the Eckert parties. Well, the irony isn't lost on me. This isn't how my work typically goes, I hope you realize. Even I can admit I wouldn't do this for every client. And somehow that makes this worse. It's painfully obvious I have some personal investments enough to merit this. He gestured vaguely to the kitchen, then to you.
I swear.
More than I intended to be, more than I ought to have. His arms relaxed, falling uselessly to his side. Finally, Baxter pried himself off the appliance, though he didn't remove himself from it for long. Instead, his black hair tousled as he flipped around, so that the back of his head was against it. His gaze shifted to the ceiling, suddenly fascinated by the next floor up. I wouldn't have done this if you weren't here. Baxter closed his eyes, sighing deeply as he continued. Even though Miranda was the client's sister, he sighed, client, in a way that made Jude sound clerical, that detached him from knowing him, Miranda or Scott, as actual people. I wouldn't have offered, it'd be overreaching to do so as much as I have. I've gone beyond the line of pure professionalism more than once already. The cake is the icing on the top. Why did you do it then, if you're so worried? And what do I have to do with this? The question made him stop in his tracks. His confession came uncharacteristically without much thought on how it'd be received. Now he needed to explain himself. Well, naturally, it's against my better judgment to make anybody uncomfortable. Of course, in such a tight spot, Jude wouldn't have questioned any help he was offered. But what would have Miranda thought? And Terry as well, if some strange man they knew a long time ago was getting that personally involved in their situation. I wouldn't have crossed that line no matter how much sympathy I had for Jude's position. Miranda and Terry had been your friends for years. You were certain Baxter was wrong about his assumption. Whether or not Baxter had prior experience with those two, there was no way they would judge him poorly for caring about someone, especially when it was for Jude and Scott. Baxter wasn't finished, however, and you weren't going to interrupt. So, where did my confidence come from? Very simply, I thought you would understand. That I had good intentions, that the odd lengths I went to was merely how I am, that it was okay to let me be involved, and if you did understand, everybody else would as well. Oh. His answer fell like a rock into still water. He seemed smaller, younger now, like he was still 19.
Truthfully.
As soon as it comes to you, it appears my reason goes out the window, as long with much of my dignity. He snorted, derisively, and didn't know where to look. The tiles above had lost their appeal. But that is how it is. I understand, Baxter. I know you. I don't understand, Baxter. I don't know why you do this to yourself, to everybody. I want to understand you, but you make that hard. I'm glad you trust me. There were no words that could think of that wouldn't cheapen his feelings. I'm glad you trust me. He settled on staring past the wall, past everything. His arms crossed over his chest. Baxter's fingers dug into his sleeves, his shirt pinching and knitting the fabric with new creases. His voice felt far away, too, like he wasn't there in the room with you anymore. It's odd, really. I'm the one who's left. And yet, I haven't stopped seeing you as someone important to me. Important in my life. It truly does seem as though everything I did was for no reason at all. Baxter gave you no time to process the emotions he stirred before he launched into a non-sequitur that sent you for a loop in an entirely different way. James, do you know that I enjoy dyeing my hair? For a second, you weren't sure that you heard that right. Baxter had been painfully honest with you the last few seconds, only to prompt you about hair dye. It convinced you that he was doing the same thing he always did, changing the topic when it became a little too real. When nothing further happened, you realized he was seriously waiting for an answer. Yeah, your hair was dyed when I met you, and white stripes. Like everything else about him, though, you didn't add that to the conversation. He smiled faintly as he idly ran fingers along the curves of his bangs. That was my most dramatic look. However, I started dyeing my hair when I was 14. I'm still dyeing. Another little kernel of truth you hadn't been prepared for. That isn't your natural hair color?
No.
No, it's not. It's not. Then what? He twirled one of the long strands of his hair around his finger. Gray. The generous might say I could count it as black, or that it was black in the right light, as my parents placatingly put it.
Honestly.
The fact of the matter is that it's a dusty gray, quite similar to the frosting, actually. Considering it had been a decade of dye jobs, you literally never seen his roots show, Baxter was more than dedicated. No way! He chuckled at your disbelief. His smile was faint. It tucked into his cheek. Yes way. Now, why would I do that? I said it myself earlier. Who would notice a color that wasn't exactly black? And what would they care even if it did? Me, I noticed. I noticed and it bothered me, so I dyed it. He pinched the fringe of his traitorous hair against him, finally leaving it be, his hands finding its resting place on his upper arm. Was it something I wanted only for my own preference, or was it because I believed if I saw it as perfection, then that it meant everybody else did? Probably the latter. That was the crux of it. He doubted his actions and appearance because others could scrutinize them, but whether they actually would or not didn't matter. He projected self-invented insecurities on those around him. Baxter only seemed half aware that was what happened. He couldn't fully believe those who cared about him did so without terms or conditions. His jaw tensed with newfound frustration. Baxter was firmly rooted in his moment, stubbornly refusing to take his thought away from it. It startled you, in part because this was the first time he had ever opened up to you without prodding. And because at the end of everything, you were still the only one he trusted enough to tell it to.
Well...
I have always been like this, you know, James. I won't bore you with the details. His voice was as delicate, as heavy as glass. I'm sure I've already made you question your remaining here enough as it was. In short, what I'm saying is that I'm a fraud in all regards. You can't take any of it seriously, including what the color of my hair is. He chuckled darkly, pushing himself off the refrigerator and busying himself with checking the cake in the freezer. As the tension reached its fever pitch, Baxter reached out to pluck the metaphorical thread and unwound it with a force of levity. No more than 10 minutes had passed since you put it inside but inside felt like hours had gone by.
I appreciate the understanding.
Your many attempts to give me credence are noted and appreciated, though. He shut the door again before announcing that he would need to check the oven again to make sure that it was really off. Not that he doubted your ability to turn off an appliance, but for his own self-preservation, that time it was the classic Baxter. Change the topic when it got too uncomfortable for him. He always did that. Baxter tore himself apart, shred by shred, exactly like he did to the cake mix box earlier, all for just being who he was. Of course, he wasn't telling the truth when he told you he didn't do that anymore. That was another of his made-up stories, he said for the amusement of the listener. You had some clarity for the first time in years. Baxter returned to your side eventually. His teasing smile softened as his gaze met yours pensive stare. You were kind to listen to me complain. He reached out lightly, pressing his fingers into your arm.
I'm sorry.
It was a bad idea to make you deal with that. I won't sour everything that we, Jude, Scott, Miranda, and Terry worked for by ruminating on my indiscretions the night before the wedding. At least not for any longer. His voice was firmer, it changed from moments before. He drew his line in the sand for the evening, meaning that you weren't going to be able to pry any more out of him. But perhaps later, if you're interested. Oh? I get it, but we are definitely going to talk later. Fine, I'll let it go. Okay, Anderson, you can't keep running from it forever, Baxter. You simply let it placate him. I get it, but we're definitely going to talk later. He'd been the one who started it. You were going to finish it. He didn't give you a response outright, instead favoring a practiced smile. There was a tinge of regret that lingered in his eyes, at telling you no again. At least this time, once and for all, it was a no for now.
Good.
Can I offer you a glass of water, James, still or sparkling? There is oat milk if you're feeling fancy. The only other drinks in the apartment are, as touched on before, not appropriate for the present situation. I won't repeat every mistake of my life, only the largest, most impactful ones. Being offered water while teetering on the precipice of deep, meaningful conversation, huh? Where had you heard that one before? Except where you'd been trying to help Baxter open up that fateful evening long ago. He was the one again deploying social niceties to make sure that didn't happen. Talk about ironic. It was strange that the events from 5 years prior would keep showing relevance in the present, but with the step out of order, the meanings jumbled up. As if the two of you were tentatively resuming the motions of a dance you'd thought forgotten, an encore of a summer which had since faded into memory, variations on a theme. Baxter was still regarding you with polite expressions, faintly inquisitive. Right, the drink, that was the real question. Water would be great, some sparkling water would be nice. Go for a glass of oat milk, sure. No chance of having those inappropriate drinks? I'm fine, thank you. Let's see what his response is. Baxter's eyes were serious, though his manner was light and friendly.
No, thank you.
I would rather not. I apologize. All right. Now I'll make our serious choice. I really need to know what would happen. Water.
Certainly.
Certainly. Let me take care of that. I don't care for sparkling water. It just doesn't taste right to me. Please feel free to make yourself at home in the living room. I promise you the sofa and chairs are comfortable despite their boxy appearance. You opted for the sofa and eased yourself down into the various colored cushions. It was a pleasant surprise to find that Baxter hadn't been kidding. Her seat was nice and plush. Your host busied himself with the fridge. He'd been intimately acquainted with, fetching a can of sparkling water along with a filtered jug of still water. As he did so, you couldn't stop yourself from taking a peek at the refrigerator shelves from where you were, wondering how much it resembled the one in his rented condo. It had been a paltry and tragic affair. Thankfully, it was a thing of the past. Baxter now kept a healthy range of foodstuffs in his own home. He was looking after himself. Having taken care of the refreshments, Baxter made his way over to you and seated himself in a chair. Your glass is veiled with fresh condensation were placed on the coffee table. He went to the effort of placing coasters underneath each one with his now free hands. A minute's pause was filled by the two of you slowly sipping your drinks. Then Baxter returned his glass to its place and took a stab at conversation. He elected for something easy, starting to run over the plan for tomorrow, once more with a focus specifically on what you and what he would be doing, rather than the happy couple. To clarify, I will take care of the decorations in the morning alongside Terry, Miranda, and other members of Jude's family. In the meantime, you'll need to, and so forth. It was a subject entirely within his wheelhouse, and you nodded vaguely along as he went through the itinerary in stages, asking him questions if you needed clarification. Eventually, he ran out of details to touch upon, and you both ran out of stuff to drink, but decided that now was the time to tackle the remainder of the cake. In the kitchen, once again, Baxter retrieved the carrot cake from the freezer and placed it upon the wooden cutting board with the same gentleness as if it were a newborn baby. What came next was entirely incomparable to childcare. Selected a large serrated knife from the block on the counter. You passed over the stencil prepared earlier while he tested the surface of the cake with his fingers. Satisfied with the consistency and temperature, he put the stencil on top. There was a moment of adjustment, lining the paper up so that the cake was centered underneath. Then Baxter made a small murmur of relief.
Hallelujah.
Thank goodness the cake didn't turn out too small. This should be doable. All I have to do is follow the guidelines we have so nicely laid out. Good luck. You sit back, giving him enough space to work without bumping his elbows. With the knife in one hand and the other pressing down on the stencil to steady it, Baxter set about carving. He worked slowly, methodically, moving the bulk of the excess with straight, clean cuts and mercilessly scraped the outline of the stencil. Then, moving inwards, he began to refine the curved edges. The scraps of a surplus cake were tossed into a pan that had been baked in, forming a small mound of crumbly fragments. You wondered if he ever watched Xavier do something like that before, or perhaps he'd seen one of the mini cake competition shows on these days. His form was solid. Regardless, once there was no cake left protruding from underneath the stencil, he peeled back the paper to reveal a controller-shaped cake. Well, that was, of course, the expected outcome, the whole point of making a template. In fact, you experienced a thrill of seeing it work. Baxter was as happy about it as you were. He beamed up at you, making a brief jazz hand motion to emphasize the final product like he performed a magic trick. One controller cake as ordered. Our hard work with the guideline paid off magnificently. Thanks, you did a good job. Alright, we're going to cut that there. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, hit like. That way I know you're enjoying the content I'm making. Hit subscribe. That way YouTube brings you back Here's Happens Next. I won't take up any more of your time. Have a good day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.